I'm Alex.
Hi, I'm Zachary Bruce Clark, and this is Brown versus Board for Mr. Zender's class.
Okay, so for the first question, how did the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus Board of Education impact the concept of separate but equal?
We got that one.
Can you ask the question again?
How did the Supreme Court's ruling in Brown versus Board on the subject of education impact the concept of separate but equal?
I think that it was one of the first big steps in like just demolishing segregation and having black people come into schools that aren't meant for black people. So maybe just like, yeah, just the first big step in changing the fact that we have a huge, massive problem of segregation.
Yeah, I agree. There was always the separate but equal. There was still segregation when technically it wasn't allowed, but I feel like this was a big step towards real equality.
Okay, and how did the ruling in Brown versus Board affect the education system throughout all states instead of just the states where it was like big, like Mississippi and that?
I feel as though it kind of impacted all the schools. They all started getting the impression that black people were supposed to go to white school.
Yeah, if anything, it's kind of like how it is today with social media. It kind of just spread like wildfire, the fact that black people are allowed to go into white schools now. So maybe some schools kind of just made the conscious decision to start doing that themselves, so they weren't like the last school having a segregated school.
Okay, and how did Brown versus Board of Education rule impact racial segregation beyond education? So in normal day-to-day life for like black people or brown people or stuff like that in the U.S. after the law was created, how do you think it affected them, negatively and positively?
Negatively, I think it was because of the backlash. There was a bunch of backlash because of the Brown versus Board. I think it impacted their day-to-day life. They probably got more racism. Positively, their kids got the opportunity to go to schools that white people have had the opportunity to go to.
Definitely agree with him. I feel that that when it first happened, black people coming into schools probably wasn't the easiest going thing in the beginning. Like, I bet you there was still bullying going on, still segregation in the school in the beginning of it, because it probably wasn't the most simple transition for white people at the time, I guess. But yeah.
Okay, and can you discuss any ongoing challenges from racial segregation in education today?
I mean, you can still see racism even in public schools, such as like, I mean, you can hear like racial words, or you can just see discrimination throughout schools.
Yeah, I don't think it's necessarily as intense as it was back then, like separate bathrooms, separate schools, but I definitely do think that here and there are still some people that have the ignorance to be or make racial slurs towards people, which sometimes it could be just like a friendly joke, but I do believe that some people get the other hand of it and isn't so friendly towards them.
And how has Brown versus Board shaped interpretation and application of the 14th Amendment, which is equality?
Today?
Anything. Today, especially, yeah.
I mean, I feel like it definitely shaped it. Again, like I said earlier, it was like one of the big first steps of people actually stepping up and trying to change the fact that black people aren't treated the way they should be. And the fact that it was so hard and it took so long to get to that point. But yeah,
Yeah, I think it was a step in the right direction. It shapes how we treat minorities to this day. Just a good step towards equality.
Okay, and last question. In your opinion, what is the long-lasting like legacy or effects today? So like, how has Brown versus Board shaped rights today for races?
I mean, I see plenty of different races at our school today, and they all get equal opportunities to learn.
Yeah, I would say segregation has definitely taken a big decline in how intense it was and how real it could be, and how people definitely were treated differently like all the time, and now you rarely see it. And if you do, we just classify it as bullying now. So I don't really think that there is too much segregation anymore, which is a good thing, especially in schools.
So for Brown versus Board, with the Supreme Court's ruling in the educational impact on Brown versus Board, where like you can't go to school if you were a certain color and you had to be segregated, kind of. How does that impact separate but equal with like the split, the divide between?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest factors that affected it at the time comes down to money. And so whenever you have segregation happening, you are having to separate the funds that are meant to go into one building. Well, now you need to fund two buildings. And it's not just the creation of those buildings, it's also employing both of those facilities. So you would need twice as many teachers, twice as many administrators than you would if everybody was integrated. So that was definitely a direct thing that was impacted by segregation at the time. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good. So with that, how would that have affected the education system back then? How does it affect it today?
So how it affected the education system back then is because of the attitudes toward people of color at the time. They were not given as much funding as other schools. They were also from poorer areas in the society, so they didn't have as many taxes going into those buildings. And so then you have the ideal of it being separate but equal, but the reality was it was never equal.
And then with that impact on education, how did that impact the perception of the Supreme Court's rule in like social change and how it should be dealt with?
I think a lot of people were worried at the time about what the consequences of integrating would be. They had an idea of how that would affect their students on both sides of the situation. And I think that whenever there's a big change, there is a lot of fear that comes with that. And I think that hopefully we learned that, over time, that our fears don't need to lead us into acting in outrageous ways. We can still express our fears and, take caution when there's changes that happen, whether it's a positive change like the integration of the schools, or whether it's a different sort of change that we're just not ready for. Hopefully we can better express our concerns and move forward together.
Okay. And then final question, what do you think the long-term legacy of Brown versus Board could be, or what is it today?
I think there's a lot of people who assume that because of Brown versus Board of Education, that decision, that ruling, that schools are fully integrated. And I think that that's a misunderstanding of what diversity means. A lot of times when people talk about diversity, they think that it means just race. But even in a very monochromatic society, you still have a lot of diversity that happens because of social class, because of religious background, because of your home life. So just think about the people who come here to Post Falls High School. How many come from homes where their parents are still together versus their parents are separated? How many of them belong to different religions? And so there's a lot of diversity no matter where you go. And I think that being integrated helps us to be able to understand more about the society that we live in. And so I think that hopefully is the legacy of Brown versus Board of Education, is just us overcoming differences in general and being able to work together no matter what.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thanks, Ed.
Yeah.